Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 102 of the Midweek Bible Study. It's good to have you here. Hope that you are doing all right. Hope that everything is going well for you. We appreciate you stopping by here and joining us for the study. Whether you're with us right now or whether you join us a little bit later on, we appreciate you being here. Hope, as I say, hope things are going good for you. And there's always benefit to coming together in order to study the Word of God. And so we're really glad that you are here tonight. We want to always give you an invitation. If you're someone who is around the Portia area, then please come by and see us sometime. We would love to talk with you. We'd love to see you. We'd love to worship with you at the Portia Church of Christ. Right now, we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning for class and worship, respectively, and then at 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and then on 6 o'clock for Wednesday night. And on the first Sunday night of every month, we have a fellowship meal, and so you can come see us, and you can have some food as well. I hope that you would come do that. And we're located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And so hope that you can come by and see us sometime if you're in the area, around one of those times. And also, there's several events that are going on in the area wide of the church in this area. I know there's a lot of singings that are going on this month. Tomorrow is the area wide singing down at Washington Avenue. It starts at 7 o'clock, and they always have a great singing down there, and so that would be a good place to be. On Saturday, they have an area wide singing at Imboden for our monthly singings that we do there. If you haven't checked those out, I encourage you to. They are this one's at Imboden, and it'll be there, and it starts at 6 o'clock, I believe. And so if you and in that area, you can check that out as well. And I believe on May 21st, there's going to be an area-wide singing up at Hardy as well, and a fish fry. And so there's a lot of opportunities for singing in this month of May. I didn't know it was such a musical month, but it is for the church, and so a lot of events going on. And so hopefully you can take advantage of those if they're in your area. And also, we want to let you know that if you have any questions or comments about what we study, then please feel free to get in contact with us. We would love to talk with you and be someone who, if you have any questions about what we study, then maybe help to explain something, so we don't have any misunderstandings or anything of that sort. And so just know that you can always reach out to us, and we're usually pretty easy to get a hold of. But it's good to have Cheryl Herring here. It's good to have you here. Hope everything is going good over your way. I know it's rained a lot today, so hopefully you stay dry today. And we got Glenda Johnson here as well. Hope you are doing good. We appreciate you being here as well. It's always good to see you. Tonight we are going to be in Acts chapter 26. Acts chapter 26 is going to be our destination for our scripture tonight, and more than likely this is going to be a part one of a probably a two-part study on this chapter, because it's hard to fit everything into your one lesson, unless you go for an hour and a half. Then you might be able to fit it all in, but it's definitely a lot going on in this chapter. Paul is someone who got himself in some hot water at times. As you know, he's someone who oftentimes angered a lot of people. He agitated a lot of people, frustrated some people, and they sometimes took action on him. And sometimes they beat him, sometimes they did other things, and he was someone who wasn't deterred by that, but yet he kept moving forward. He kept going on, and which is admirable. But eventually, the Jewish people or the Pharisees and the religious authorities, they had enough, and eventually it was either Paul was going to get killed, or he was going to get arrested. And thankfully, Paul got arrested instead of being killed. And so in Acts chapter 26, we find him, still in prison, still being held, and he's giving a defense for these accusations that the Jewish people had brought against him. And it's definitely something, a saga that goes that goes on for a while. If you go back to chapter 24, I believe. Yeah, chapter 24 is when they bring these charges, against him, and then 25, where Paul, he appeals to Caesar. He's someone who appeals to the highest thing that he could, the highest court, civil court of that land, which was Caesar himself, and he appeals to him, and so that's where his case is going to be brought. But the predicament, that the man in charge here, this man by the name of Festus, he had a kind of an interesting position here, because he made the decision. He said, Paul, he hasn't done anything in order to deserve death. He's an innocent man, but yet he has appealed to Caesar. But I don't want to send him if I don't know what to charge him with. Basically, he's saying, I don't want to send him to Caesar, and Caesar asks, what was this man's crime? What was he charged with? And he says, I don't know. He says, I find it unreasonable to send a man to Caesar without a charge. And so Paul's going to have to give a defense to another man by the name of Agrippa II, and he's going to try to help out, Festus, to give him something to go on, so that he can charge Paul, with something. And so we get here to Acts chapter 26, and we're going to read a couple of verses here to kind of get our footing in this chapter, and then we'll look at some things outside of that. But this is Acts chapter 26 here. Starting in verse 1, it says, So Agrippa said to Paul, You have permission to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and made his defense. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, that I'm going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. And we know that Paul was someone who wasn't just a spiritually knowledgeable person. He wasn't just someone who knew a lot about, the Bible, or about the old law, or how to, talk about, spiritual things. But Paul had a pretty deep education. He was someone who was educated, very well. He knew the legal system. He knew how all that worked. He knew how to what to do, and kind of the things to say in this manner. And so you see how he's addressing him here, and how he makes this kind of introduction to his speech. And he's showing that he's not out of his depth in this case. In our day and age, a lot of times if a person is put on trial, they will hire a lawyer, and a lawyer will make a defense for them, or they will be someone who will act on their behalf because they are knowledgeable in the law. But Paul here, he doesn't get a lawyer. He's not someone who hires someone who is an expert in legal defense, but he does it himself. He makes his own defense. And as we'll see here in chapters 25 and 26, he's pretty good at it. He knows what he's doing. And so he's going to make this defense before Agrippa. Now, Agrippa, there is more than one Agrippa that shows up in the Bible. If you remember the family of the Herods, Herod is someone who shows up, and his family shows up a lot in the New Covenant. Herod the Great, the one who was in charge when Jesus was born, the one who ordered the death of all the newborns, the one who had the conversation with the wise men. He was referred to as Herod the Great, and his son was by the name of Agrippa the First. Herod Agrippa the First, and he had more than one son, but in this line, Agrippa the First was his son. And Agrippa, this is the man that we read about in Acts chapter 12. If you go back to Acts chapter 12 and you read about the Herod that is spoken of in that story, that's Herod Agrippa the First. That is, the son of Herod the Great, and he's the father of this Herod that we are taking a look at tonight. And if you remember that story, it doesn't end well. For that Herod in Acts chapter 12, and because he ended up taking glory from God and taking it for himself, and God punished him for that. But this man is Herod Agrippa II, and he, like I said, he's a grandson of Herod the Great. He's the son of Herod Agrippa I, and so this man is a pretty big deal in this case. He's a pretty well-known guy. He's got a lot of influence. He's got a lot of wealth. He's someone who has some authority. He's a pretty big deal in this case. If you look at verses 23 in Acts chapter 25, the chapter right before this, it says, "So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with military tribunes and the prominent men of the city." That's how this man entered, the room. It says with great, fanfare, with almost like a parade of people come in, and they make a big deal about how Herod Agrippa, is here. And so, not exactly, you might say, a humble man in this case, but he was someone who seemed like he enjoyed, that attention. He enjoyed, that popularity. And so, he was someone that a lot of people, looked up to. But it's interesting how Paul starts out this defense. He says in verse 2, he says, "I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, that I'm going to make my defense." Paul considered himself, fortunate. And let's just take stock, of Paul's situation, in this case. Paul is someone who has, been he's been, pushed out. He's been someone who has, been beaten. He's been, stoned. He's been, robbed. He's been, he's been put, in prison. He's someone who has had, all these things, brought up against him. And then he's almost killed, numerous times. He's arrested. He's now in jail, and he's trying to find a way, out of jail. And yet, he starts off this defense by saying, "I consider myself fortunate." If you think about that, Paul was someone who considered himself to be fortunate, even though all these things had happened to him, and he's sitting there, not a free man, but in chains, trying to give a legal defense for these accusations. He considers himself, fortunate. Sometimes we consider ourselves, unfortunate when maybe our day just doesn't go right, or maybe when something inconveniences us, or something doesn't go our way. Sometimes we consider ourselves unfortunate, or put down from those things. But Paul was someone who he saw the big picture. Even though all these things had happened to him, he says, "I consider myself fortunate." Sometimes it's good for us, to kind of zoom out and take a look, at the big picture. And it doesn't mean we have to enjoy those instances in which these bad things happen, in which things don't go our way. Those are not fun. They're not good things to happen. But when we zoom out, even though those things do occur in our life, we can still say, I'm fortunate because I know who is watching over me. I know, who I serve. I know who I can look to, for strength. We can echo the words of Paul here and say we ourselves are fortunate if we're someone who has that mindset, because Paul didn't let his circumstances, dictate his perspective, on life. And it's an example that I think we can follow suit, with. because God has given us so much. He's blessed us with so much. It seems like it would be a very off thing to do in order to neglect that, in order to ignore what He has given us. But we can consider ourselves fortunate as well. I've said, you can read throughout the Bible and you will find numerous things where you could count yourself as fortunate because you are a Christian. But he says, I can consider myself fortunate that is before you, King Agrippa, I'm going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, and especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. He says, now Agrippa, one of the places of expertise that he had, was the Jewish law, because he had authority over the temple and he had authority over the high priest. It was Agrippa's responsibility to appoint, the high priest. Originally, when God instituted it, when Aaron was the first high priest, it was something that was passed down, within the family, within the Levites. He was someone that was passed down, from Aaron, to his son and to his son, and things like that. But at the time of Jesus, they had morphed the office of a high priest into more of a political position, and it was less spiritual and more political. And the Agrippa here, he had the authority to kick someone out and appoint someone else, or to appoint whoever he wanted, as a high priest. And he seems someone who takes the law seriously, and someone who looks to it as something that is to be respected. And so it's likely he didn't treat this position as something that was frivolous, or something that was unnecessary, or just purely for political gain. But there was an element of that to this office at this time. And so this man that Paul is talking to, while Festus might not have known everything that Paul was saying, Agrippa would be very familiar with the old law. And so when Paul starts talking about how the promise that, for instance, in verse 6, it says, now I stand here on trial because of my hope and the promise made by God to our fathers. Well, if you see down here at the bottom, what was that promise? What was the promise that was made to their fathers? Well, Agrippa would know that because he was someone that was familiar with the old law. It's much easier to give your defense to someone who understands what you're talking about, who understands the background that you come from. And this was someone that Agrippa was. And so he knew exactly what Paul was about. And so Paul can more and more easily talk to him in this manner. But if we continue on in verses 4 and following, he says, my manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nation and in Jerusalem, is known by all the Jews. They have known for a long time, if they are willing to testify, that according to the strictest party of our religion, I have lived as a Pharisee. And now I stand here on trial because of my hope and the promise made by God to our fathers, to which our 12 tribes hope to obtain, as they earnestly worship night and day. And for this hope I am accused by Jews, O king. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? And so there's a lot of things in here that Paul said. As I said, this is just the introduction to his defense. If you look at the entirety of chapter 26, this concludes his defense. The entire chapter is dedicated to this address that Paul makes. And so there's a lot of things that he puts forth here. But it's good to have the Hudsons with us. David Hudson, it's good to have you here from Rockford, Illinois. Hope you guys are doing well up there. Hope it's a little drier up there. It's been really rainy down here today, and so hopefully you had some good weather up there today. But here he says, in verses 4, he talks about his background and how he grew up. He says, "My manner of life from my youth was spent, among learning how to be a Pharisee, especially." He says, "All the Jews who know my background, all of them know where I came from, and if they were willing to testify, they would tell you that I was, a one of the." He was basically, the valedictorian of the school of Pharisees. Is basically what Paul was. He was someone who, with all his passion, with all of his might, he was someone who pursued that goal that the Pharisees had, and so he was someone that looked to that, and that's how he started out. And he says in verse 6, he says, he makes a pivot. He said, "But now I stand here on trial because of my hope and the promise made by God, to our fathers." He doesn't necessarily say, "I am on trial because of Christianity," but he kind of skillfully says, "I'm on trial because of the hope and in the promise made by God," which was the same thing, but it's something that connected the Old Testament to what Jesus did. As we know, the entirety of the Old Testament is something that looked forward to the time of Christ, the time in which Jesus he would walk this earth and do what he did, and free us from sin. And so Paul says, "It's not any laws that I broke. It's not any civil laws or any disruption that I made. But the only reason why I'm on trial here is because of my faith. It's because of the hope that God has given us." And it's interesting that he refers to it as as hope. He refers to a Christian's faith as hope. You think about everything that your faith is, and all the things that it provides for you. It provides you a relationship with God. It provides you with with those good things, those spiritual things. It provides you with, of course, we refer to as faith, but it provides you with faith as well. But hope is important, because if Paul didn't have hope, if he didn't have something to look forward to in the future, do you think he could have made it through all these things that he did? Do you think he could have made it through this trial and all this ridicule and all these threats that came his way? I don't think so, because it's something that he would there would be no reassurance that everything would be all right in the end. But Paul had hope. He had probably more hope than anyone out there did, because he knew that what he was doing was essentially an investment in the future, and he knew that when it came time for his time to be done, that he was going to have that reward. He was going to be someone that could have that and experience that promise that God has given us. And so we know that having hope is something that is incredibly important, because just like Paul, we know that our road and the narrow road that we walk is not always smooth. It's not always even ground, but sometimes we have to go through some pretty tough things. Sometimes we have to go through things that we'd rather not. Sometimes we get kind of beat down by the things that life can throw at us. But if we're like Paul and we have hope, there's essentially nothing that we can't get through. There's essentially nothing that we can't, make it through in this life if we hold on, to that hope. And that hope was something that pulled Paul all throughout his life, all throughout those things that happened, to him. And I think that's an incredibly important part, of his story. What was the hope, that he had. And so, and in connection to what we talked about earlier, when you talk about being fortunate, counting yourself fortunate, counting yourself fortunate that you have that hope is something that is there as well, because Jesus, there's a lot of people out there who will try to tell you that everything is meaningless, or that nothing really matters, but there's no hope in the end. This is all there is. But the Bible tells us something different. It tells us something that there's something much better that we can look forward to. And that, like I said, that can pull you through a lot of those tough situations. And so it's important to have hope in what we do. But he continues to talk about, he says, to which our 12 tribes hope to obtain as they earnestly worship night and day. And for this hope I'm accused by Jews, O king. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? And like I said, that was a big part of your Christianity that a lot of people disagreed with, was the resurrection. He says, why do you think it's incredible that God can raise the dead? Why do you think that it is impossible that God could do this? Do you think that this is beyond the capability of God? Do you think this is beyond the authority of God? Do you think this is something that's too hard for him to do? Why do you think it is incredible that God raises the dead? We know that nothing is impossible with God. The scriptures tell us that there's nothing in this world that is too far out there for God, because God is someone who created this world. He created the rules that bind this world. He created this environment, and so he he's someone that has mastery and authority over everything, including life itself. And so if he wants to raise someone from the dead, he has that power to do so, as we've seen many times throughout the scriptures. We can't put God in a box. We can't put God in a little section that we've carved out for him, where he can only do certain things that we allow him to do. That's not how God works. But he's someone who is the Lord of the earth. He's the Lord of what we know. And the Bible says his ways are not our ways. And so he's someone who has the ability to do things that we deem as impossible. And so we don't need to be someone who, like these people, kind of put God in that box per se. But we know that there's a lot of things we don't understand, a lot of things that we maybe wish we understood better, but God can do things that we deem impossible. And that factors back into that hope that we were talking about. Because he can do the impossible, that means that our hope is justified, and it is something that's worthy to be invested in. And so it's something that we can keep in mind as we continue to go along. But he'll continue down here in verses 9 and 10, 11, where he says, I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus of Nazareth, and I did so in Jerusalem. I not only locked up many of the saints in prison after receiving authority from the chief priests, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. And I punished them often in all the synagogues, and tried to make them blaspheme, and in raging fury against them, I persecuted them even to foreign cities. Paul, he recalls his work as a Pharisee, and how he did everything he could in order to stamp out the name of Jesus, and how to stamp out your Christianity. And he says that he would, in raging fury, he persecuted them, which is something that is pretty intense, as you might say. But that's something that Paul did, and he was someone who never hid that. He never denied that. But he was always someone who, while there's a ton of regret in his voice for doing that, he's never someone who hid that, and that's something to be admired about who Paul was. He never denied his faults, but he's someone who was open about them, and yet he knew that the forgiveness of God was something that was there for him. And we'll talk more about this next week when we talk about chapter 2, or part 2 of this section, and look at a little bit more about Paul's defense here in Acts chapter 26. But for now, I think that'll be it for tonight. I think that we've covered a good bit here in these first 11 verses, and hope this is something that has benefited you in a good way. we'll be back here next Thursday, for another episode. It'll be episode 103. And so if this is something that has done you some good, and feel free to share it with anyone who could use it. And if you have any suggestions or any suggestions or requests for future episodes, and please let me know about those. But until then, like I said, we'll be back here next Thursday at 7 o'clock for another episode. And so we hope that you can go out and be the light of the world and glorify God in everything that you do. And we'll catch you next time.